Hello, hello, and welcome back to the 5 Foot Strong podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Gerlach, and on today's episode, we have a guest who changed his career after realizing the profession he originally chose did not align with his personal values and skills. David Sazant was a former litigator who changed his career and now is currently a men's therapist. While David was working as a lawyer, he went back to school and graduated with a Master's of Arts in Counselling Psychology. David's mission now is to help men navigating mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and more. After having found his true calling and seeing firsthand the importance of pursuing his own values, David is now launching Pursuit Counselling and Therapy, a men's therapy clinic in Toronto, Canada. So I can't wait to get into it all. And without further ado, let's welcome David Sazant to the 5 Foot Strong podcast. Hey, David, how are you?
Oh my gosh, what an intro. Hi, Jess.
How's everything?
Things are good. Things are good. How are you?
Good. So I want to ask you the question that I ask all guests that come on is, what does being strong mean to you?
I love that question. To me personally, my opinion, strong. I'm always, I'm in the mental health world. So when I think strong, I think from a mental and emotional standpoint, what strength means. And the words that come to my mind are mental flexibility and resilience. And what I mean by that is the courage to confront the things that scare us and make us uncomfortable directly, willingly, and without avoidance.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what strength means, and that's what it looks like.
Well, confronting, the hard things straight up and not avoiding it and using distractions or anything. And resilience, 100% is inner strength. So I completely agree with that. So I want the listeners to get to know a little bit of your journey. So share a little bit how you got into the mental health space.
Yeah. Let's take it back, I suppose, to finishing my undergrad. And I finished my undergrad doing a Bachelor of Arts in psychology. And at that point, having graduated, I didn't really know what was next. I didn't want to pursue psychology really at that point in time. I didn't do a thesis, so I wasn't going to go straight into a master's of anything psychology related. And so I moved home. And I was acting quite a bit for theater, for film, for TV. And I spent a number of years just acting, working jobs that would allow me to do all that. And then about 4 years later, my beautiful acting career never quite got off the ground. And so I decided at that point, okay, I need to do something else. And it was more of a process of elimination where I decided to go to law school. I didn't know anything about the law. I didn't grow up passionate about the idea of being a lawyer. But I decided, okay, I suppose law school's for me. I'm good with my words. Maybe that's enough. And I went to law school, graduated, started working in litigation right away after having graduated. And I worked in litigation for 5 or 6 years. And I just always felt like I was working a career that was meant for somebody else and not for me. And so I kept thinking, I'll figure it out. I'll learn this. I'll learn the game. I'll learn the industry. It doesn't feel like it's for me, but maybe this is how everybody feels. And over time, I started kind of getting the feeling that it wasn't changing. I was pretending every day. And it started to wear me down a little bit. And that's when lunch periods would come around, lunch hours, and I would get in my car and I would drive around and I would start calling people I knew were once lawyers who have started working things adjacent, whatever that looked like. And I started making connections, hearing their stories. And then I hired a career counselor that specialized in working with lawyers. And after 1 or 2 sessions of working with this incredible person, I knew that I was either going to be a therapist or a coach. And I decided on therapy. And then I went back to school.
I think it's important to follow your passion. And if you don't find your passion in one area, it takes strength and resilience to say, okay, I'm not happy here. Let's change. Let's chase where I'm going to be happy. And that's where you're passionate about. And so what made you finally make that big career change?
Yeah, it was a few things. It was, I had to figure out logistically what my life was going to look like. At that point, I wasn't yet a homeowner, but I was paying rent. And so it's kind of like, okay, am I going to go back to school and not work at all? I had this incredible opportunity fall into my lap where literally a Facebook friend of mine put up a post saying that her firm is looking for a part-time litigator. I had never in my life heard of such a thing. And I reached out. Next thing I knew, I was working as a part-time litigator in an area of law that I was already familiar with. And so that opportunity made me feel more and more that, okay, I can do both. I can earn a living or just enough to cover my expenses, and I can go back to school and pay tuition and spend this time. And so that really emboldened me to make that choice. But also, I didn't really know at the time that it was my passion. And I speak to clients a lot about passion, where it's, a lot of clients ask me, how do I find my passion? I don't know if I have a passion.
Yeah.
And so we speak more about what they feel instinctively good at, how they process information, what types of subject matter they gravitate to, whether they're familiar with it or not, and what their values are, what they want their lifestyle to look like. And so all of that together kind of painted the picture that, okay, mental health is for me. That's my next move. I got to figure out how to make this happen.
So now that you're in the mental health space, and that you're giving back into a way, like, did you ever deal with mental illness growing up?
Good question. I was an insecure kid. I remember ever since being, I would say, 11 or 12, and I'm 37 now. I'll be 38 in a couple of weeks. Okay. Ever since I would say grade 7, I remember being an insecure kid. I was an anxious kid. I had low self-esteem. I was a people pleaser. And it almost feels that, in retrospect, the decisions I made growing up were primarily based on how I would be seen by other people. And that led me to, okay, well, if that's my primary motivation for everything I do, is how other people see me, then I started to really ignore my own instincts as far as what I wanted, what was right for me, and started thinking about it as what would be expected of me? What decisions can I make now that would make other people approve of me? And so, which of course feeds low self-esteem. And I suppose that what I'm doing now is what I would have loved to have for me when I was younger, if that makes sense. And I think that's the reason for why a lot of us do what we do.
Well, 100%. I say the same thing. Is like, I share my story because I hope one day a girl could understand being depressed in high school, knowing that transition was hard. It's a hard time. We're all trying to figure out our lives, and we all think that we have to figure it out then. So I want, everybody to understand that they're not alone. And so I find that, I talk to people all the time, and everybody has a journey, and everybody, our lives are a journey. We have different stages. We have different chapters. It's all part of who we are. But I find that, as I was telling you before, doing this podcast, I've noticed that men have a hard time sharing about their journeys. Mm-hmm. Is there why is that stigma around that?
Well, it comes down to still there feels like there's a need for men generally, and I'm going to generalize here for a little bit. There seems to still be a need to take on a traditional type gender role, which is to show as little emotion as possible unless it's positive. And if any negative emotions are going to be shown, not fear. Right. So there's still this instinct to conceal fear, to conceal vulnerability, to conceal worry and anxiety and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And what happens there is, if we plug that hole, if we don't let those feelings come out, they will come out in other ways.
Yeah.
They don't just disappear. They will transform and come out in other ways. And those ways look like anger. Those ways look like being aloof, being dismissive, being irritable. And the behaviors that a lot of men do in consequence to that don't help, because really they're trying to cope with these feelings that they feel they can't release in a healthy way.
And you know what? And I talk about, I use the word strong all the time. And men think, well, I'm going to generalize as well, is like they use strong and they think strong is a different thing than it should be. Because strength should come from inside, not from outside. And, even you saying like you were a people pleaser until you realized, oh, I'm going to look from the inside. What do I enjoy? What fuels me? That's strength more than, what do people think of you?
Yeah. It's a tacky saying to say that strength comes from within, but it's true. And we look at people that are, willing to be vulnerable, willing to be embarrassed in front of others, willing to take a risk that may fall short in front of people that they love and love them. Those people know who they're about, what they want in life, and what's important to them.
Yeah.
Those people know those things. And it's by developing a keen relationship with those things, the personal. What am I about? What are my values? What am I good at?
Yeah.
What am I looking for out of life? If I know those things, then the opinions from others, as far as what we feel would be expected of us in the eyes of others, those things become less important because we're tapping into our own inner voice. It's when we shut off that tap, so to speak, when we're no longer paying attention to what we want, because the number one priority at the top of the priority pyramid is how am I perceived, then that's going to drive our behaviors.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And I see that the fact is that I think that vulnerability is such a strength. And I wish more people understood, like, I once was told, like, I was told that I deal with my way of dealing with my past with mental illness and talking about it as a strength to me, being vulnerable and hoping that it can help people one day. That's a strength, but people don't understand that. That's that's something that a lot of people have to work on, is being vulnerable. And men, especially men, it's like, you don't want to take it out in anger or being aloof or whatever. You want to take it out in communication and saying, this is how I feel right now, and not holding it up or building it up till when you burst.
Yeah. I mean, so a big question that we want to kind of talk about is, why are people so scared of this? Why are people so scared of being vulnerable? And the answer, for not just men, but for everybody, the answer is generally that if I'm vulnerable, if I show people the things that make me feel less than, inadequate, all of these things, then I'm not going to be able to cope with the consequence of that.
Yeah.
right? There's something about if I show people the things that make me feel uncomfortable, they're going to leave, or it's going to affect my ability to behave in a competent way, or there's some sort of belief that we are not going to be able to navigate the consequence in a way that we can handle. And so it's seen as a threat, just like we don't want to touch a hot stove, or we don't want to stand in a lion's den. We don't feel like we can cope with the consequences. So when people see vulnerability as a dangerous, literally as a dangerous thing, we will do whatever we can do to avoid being in that situation. And if that means being inauthentic, then that's an option that people choose a lot.
People take the easy way out rather than going full force. And you talked about being what strong is going through the emotion. And, I think that's the only way to get to the other side is going through it, not using distractions, not avoiding what's going on, is saying how you feel, taking that, being vulnerable for that minute or so, and then saying, okay, that's behind me now, moving forward.
And I think this is important too, allowing ourselves to feel those negative emotions.
Yeah.
We are going to experience pain in life. There's no way around it. We're human beings. We're going to experience pain. Pushing it away, trying to push it away, is not going to be helpful, because those feelings we're going to experience in any event. We want to allow those emotions, and we want to, instead of responding with behaviors that take us away from our values, we want to allow that pain. We want to acknowledge it. Yeah. And then we want to choose behaviors that put us in line with our values, so that we see that this pain is not dangerous. It's just unpleasant.
100%, and when I was in high school, was diagnosed being clinically depressed and having general anxiety. And I realized that being depressed, you're living in the past, and being anxious, you're living in the future. And you have to really bring yourself to that present moment of, people worry. It's the worrying of what people are going to expect from you. It's the worrying of what people are going to think of you. And it's like, you got to stop thinking like that and do what's good for you, and bring it back to that inner strength of, I got to focus on my mental health, prioritizing it in coping skills that I know how. Everybody's going to deal with bumps on the road, but it's about how you deal with it that, makes you stronger in the end, I think.
100%. And what can trip a lot of people up is, they'll know logically not to worry about those things. They'll know logically, but if we were all able to just not worry about those things, then nobody, or a lot less people would be wrestling with mental health challenges. Yeah. So the idea is what do I focus on instead? What tools can I learn? What can I cultivate behaviorally that I can move through this pain in a healthy way, choosing healthy behaviors? And how can I witness my own self-esteem grow? And so it's about tools, and it's about insight. And
it's about healthy tools, because addictions and mental health go so hand in hand these days. People want that easy fix. They don't want to go through the hard emotions. And, I just think that, talking about healthy coping mechanisms instead of looking for that, drink after work, or, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, really quickly, because I don't want to fill our time together with jargon, but generally, when we experience emotional pain that we feel like we can't handle properly, we choose one or more of 4 groups of behaviors. Yeah. The first is distraction. Doom scrolling. That's a really, really big thing. People will stop engaging with what's making them feel uncomfortable, and they'll go on their phone, or they'll distract themselves in some way, TV, movies, whatever it is. So distraction is number one. The second is opting out of things or avoiding things. Mm-hmm. So canceling plans at the last minute, procrastinating on work, not answering that email right away. Opting out or avoidance is a big one. Yeah. Another thing people do is they try and think their way out of their emotional pain. And sometimes using thinking strategies can be a perfectly good thing, but it's about the context, why we're doing it, how often we're doing it, how rigid we are with it. And then lastly, to your point about a drink after work, is substances. And that's not only just drugs and alcohol. Yeah. Some people have a substance type. Yeah, people have food.
Yeah,
people
100%.
Use coffee, tea, people use prescription or non-prescription meds. Those four groupings of categories are routinely used by us. And so we call those, unhealthy behaviors, behaviors that we will engage with when we're feeling negatively, where instead choosing the behaviors that take us more in line with our values, it's always worth having those discussions with my clients.
So now I want to switch it. So can you give healthy coping mechanisms for, men and women who are struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. It's an incredible conversation to have with clients about what those behaviors are, and they're different for everybody. So the first thing that I like to do with my clients when we get to this point in our time together is we talk about what our values are. And our values are different depending on what our pain is, right? Depending on the things that make us uncomfortable, that will determine really what our values are. And so once we really get specific and uncover our values together, we talk about, okay, what are the behaviors that we could do over the course of our interaction with this person, or doing this task, or our day-to-day, that can bring us more in line with our values. So positive behaviors, it's hard to list them generally, but they do come from our values. And when we act in line with our values and we consistently make that a habit, it builds our self-esteem. Those behaviors, the negative behaviors, distraction, opting out, thinking strategies, and substances, if we use them in the wrong way. So for example, exercise is an incredible thing. Everybody should be exercising. Everybody should be doing certain things, but context is everything, right? If we're doing certain things that we rely on as coping mechanisms when we're feeling negative, a lot of those behaviors can take us away from our values, and they could keep our self-esteem locked in place, or at worst, it can bring it lower.
Well, it goes back to you making that big career change. Is like, if you didn't take that risk, you could spend the rest of your life not reaching your fullest your capabilities, And I think that you were able to prioritize, how do you personally prioritize your mental health?
Good question. I would say the same way I just spoke about values.
Yeah.
I do that with myself every day.
Yeah.
Thinking about my pain points, certain things that make me feel uncomfortable with certain situations. I'll think about what my values are. And here's the game I play, and I use this as a tool with clients all the time once we know our values. How can it's called flavoring and savoring, and it sounds a little tacky, but here it is. Flavoring and savoring. I know my values, okay? How can I flavor this next interaction with this person with my values? How can I flavor this next hour at work with my values related to work, with my values related to personal growth, with my values related to discipline? How can I flavor this next family gathering with my values related to family, with values related to personal growth again? So that's how I approach it, and that's how I encourage my clients to approach it too, once we know what our values are. So
Yeah.
flavoring is the first part, and then savoring is just noticing the difference.
Yeah, I think, as I said before, like, I used food to get it to deal with my emotions. And then I realized, food can be technically one of the biggest addictions in the world because we all have to eat. But I
Mhm.
use that idea of finding balance. Everybody has to eat, but you don't have to eat, you know, 10,000 calories worth of stuff. It's about making better choices, and it's about making better choices with how you spend your time, who you spend your time with. All
Mhm.
those things come back to you. And I think that's important is to work on yourself, and anybody, men, women. I think doing that personal work is about learning about your inner strength.
I agree with you 100%. It's hard to make these changes if we don't know what's going on. And I say to clients a lot, scary movies are always scarier when you can't see the bad guy.
Yeah.
And we're the same. If we don't know what is keeping our self-esteem low, or if we don't know why, or if we don't know where it comes from, then our odds of repeating these negative patterns are higher. So we need to see the bad guy. We need to know what's going on.
100%. Well, that's a great way to end there. I appreciate you coming on the 5 Foot Strong podcast, David. Thank you so much. If anyone wants to hear about your new clinic, you want to talk about it for a second?
Yeah, sure. So by the time this episode comes out, I don't know when it will be out, but my website will be up. It's going to be pursuittherapy.ca. People can find me from a clinic standpoint on Instagram at pursuit.therapy. They can find my Psychology Today profile by just typing in my name.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And I hope your journey of taking that big risk of changing your career to chase your passion and, live a happier, healthier lifestyle will inspire others to do the same. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Jess, and I hope so too. And this was great. So thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it. Thanks.